All right, welcome to another session with Right Track. This time we're covering a very, very important topic, and to be perfectly honest, it's not going to be what we've typically and traditionally been doing, because it's a very, very critical time in our nation's history and frankly in the world. What we've been seeing with the George Floyd protests and the issues that have been transpiring throughout the United States and the world is that people are voicing their concerns, people are voicing their anger, frustration, and how things are being handled, not only in society, in terms of how things are being done by the police forces and by law enforcement, by the government, by systemic racism that has existed and pervaded almost every aspect of society, whether it's law, whether it is commerce. But what we're also seeing is that there is mechanisms of addressing this issue and things that are coming to the fray, being surfaced by what's happening in the education space, which obviously is squarely in the realm of what Right Track Admissions does, as well as in the workplace and from professional development perspective. So we wanted to really bring this and discuss this issue very clearly with our audience here in the U.S. and around the world on a very, very important topic with a very close friend of mine and colleague from the Harvard Kennedy School who's been doing some great, great work in this space. And I thought it would be very instructive for folks to listen to this discussion. We're going to kind of really delve into diversity that pertains to society, what's going on now, and then discuss how that is impacting education and the workplace and what you could be doing to really kind of talk more about your diversity and helping promote diversity. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, who is Dr. Loren Powell. I'm not even going to give an introduction. I want you to do that for us, Loren. So kind of jump right into it, talk a little bit about who you are, introduce yourself, and then we'll get into a little bit more about your background, education, your job role, and so forth.
Sure. Well, first, good afternoon and hello, / good morning, or whatever it is where you are. Greetings, and I'm so glad to be joining you. I am currently the executive director of Time Up Healthcare. I am a public health professional, former state health official, working at the intersections of eradicating gender bias in the healthcare workforce and in the healthcare workplace, as well as eradicating racism and calling out the impact of racism on health, the impact of racism on society, and really championing equity and health equity in particular.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. As you can imagine, this is a conversation I couldn't think of a better person to have on with us today, because not only is Loren someone who's been, as she says, championing justice in race and race relations, but also not only from a general as a human, but also from a healthcare perspective, which is doubly important right now, because not only are we seeing systemic racism as it's coming to the fray in society and actions of the police forces and so forth, but also from a healthcare perspective. So we're doubly lucky to have Loren with us to talk about these issues. So tell me a little bit about your educational background in terms of how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I went to high school there. I knew very early on I wanted to attend an HBCU. So I went to a historically Black college or university. And I went to Xavier University, Louisiana, which is in New Orleans, Louisiana. It is the only Black Catholic institution in the country. I am not Catholic, but nonetheless, I'm excited and so glad I chose to go to Xavier. Xavier is actually the #1 institution to place African Americans into medical school, and one of the #1 institutions that graduates Black students into the life sciences. And so I was actually a biochemistry major. So I had roots in the sciences. I actually was pre-med for a while, so I wanted to apply to medical school. I wanted to be a doctor in a way. I'll come back to that. So I went to Xavier. Hurricane Katrina actually happened my senior year of college, so it was 2006, which was super challenging. I can also come back to that. So I then worked for a while. Actually, I got some real world experience. I worked at Johns Hopkins, the schools of medicine. I used my science degree. I really stepped into understanding public health in the real world sense. I recruited patients. I was a research assistant. And eventually I decided medicine wasn't the right path for me necessarily, that I cared about the healthcare system, but I didn't necessarily want to be a practicing physician. I thought I needed an MD degree for people to take me seriously in pushing forward with the changes and policy changes actually that really needed to happen in the healthcare system. So I eventually realized I don't really think this is my path. I applied to graduate school. So I went to UMass Medical School. I was in the graduate school of biomedical sciences, received a PhD in clinical and population health research with a concentration in ethnic health disparities. While I was writing my dissertation, I decided that I wasn't done with school just yet. You have to imagine that is insane. My whole family was like, "What are you doing?" My colleagues, my academic mentor was like, "What's happening here? You're about to graduate. Why are you going to another degree program?" But I knew I had this lingering interest in policy. And I felt like that was kind of the glue that would hold all the pieces of change together. And I really needed to understand that. So I applied to one school. I applied to the Kennedy School. Luckily, I got in. It was a true blessing. And that's where I met Hamada, so many other really life-changing classmates. It was a life-changing year. It was the 2016 election year. So lots of learning happened at that time. It really did solidify all the rest of my training. And then I went out, graduated, and I went out to start working.
So there's a moment where you felt that medicine in and of itself may not necessarily be the right path for you. You had certain milestones in your life, serendipitously, that I think you galvanized your actions. You talked about Hurricane Katrina, that was close to home for where you were studying, I believe, at the time, or near there. And that obviously impacted you, because I think what a lot of people saw, that it wasn't a one-on-one situation in terms of doctors to people in distress, but it was a macro issue, which I think you're saying pushed you towards more of the public policy, public health perspective. Now looking back and kind of where you are in your career, does that sound like you made the wisest move, or do you wish you had gone back to medicine, or how do you feel about all that?
That is such a great question. I have so many examples as to why I think that was the right move for me, especially right now, because when I think about COVID, I think about the impact of the coronavirus, both of my community, the African American community, the Latinx community, what it is doing just very broadly. And also the impact kind of it's having in the public health system as well. I don't think I would be satisfied with only doing only having patient interaction right now. I think that saving people and providing life-saving care to them, and support to them, fighting COVID is of paramount importance. I have such great respect for our doctors and for our nurses and in every position in the healthcare and public health industry. But I personally feel like I wouldn't feel like I was doing enough. I would feel like this is an individual intervention, and I really want to have population level intervention. And so for that reason, I feel like it was the right decision. I couldn't explain it at the time. I couldn't articulate exactly why I didn't feel like that was the exact path for me, but I understand it so much more now because because of my training, I have an understanding of how so many facets in society work together to either create health or to impede people being able to be healthy. And I'm so grateful for that because it's a framework of thinking that allows me to apply it to so many different fields, so many different positions, so many different perspectives, and helps me be able to explain it to others.
So now that you work in Virginia, and now you're working for an organization called Time's Up. Tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are doing on that front.
Yeah, Time's Up is a foundation. If you recall, about 2017. Me Too was trending, it was a trending hashtag. Time's Up also was a trending hashtag. And this all happened around the Golden Globes and really shedding light on the inequities women are continue to face in society. At that time, and Oprah gave this like really moving speech at the Golden Globes. And it was like really after that, in her speech, she literally says "Time's Up," and so it was after that that the Time's Up Foundation was really created, which was an intentional focus on eradicating gender bias and gender inequities in the workplace. So Time's Up is a larger foundation, but within the foundation, there are industry-specific initiatives. Basically, we know that in order to shift the culture of gender bias, in order to create a culture that is more affirming and inclusive of women, and not just white women, of Black women, of Latinx women, of women of intersectional identities, that we would have to do this by industry, understanding that each industry operates kind of in its own nuance and has nuanced ways in which gender bias makes itself known. And so I work specifically at the intersection of healthcare. So I'm working to eradicate gender bias in the healthcare workplace. So that includes hospitals and federally qualified health centers and pharmaceutical industry within public health institutions. So really thinking about how we create a system that is not only anti-sexist, but also anti-racist, that frees a system of oppression and creates the conditions where workers, especially in healthcare, which is so important, we all need healthcare, where workers can perform to their utmost ability and to their best ability, which then improves patient care. It improves the outcome for patients as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So in terms of, I can't think of a better role and a better time for you to be involved, because, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of COVID on inequities, whether it's gender or whether it's racial inequities that have been happening and that you're seeing starkly. But I want to kind of, even reconnecting with you, what really motivated me was this article that you wrote recently that received a lot of excellent traction. So let me kind of quickly show it to our audience. It's an article that you wrote. Tell us a little bit about what it is. And then I want to highlight a specific part of it. But tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this piece. And was it hard when you wrote it?
I'll start with your last question first. This was very hard for me to write. If we go back, it's crazy to imagine this was only 16 days ago. And it feels like so much has happened since then, but this was super hard to write. This was right after kind of the first weekend of sustained demonstration, protest, some civil unrest. It was all over the country. It was also where I am. I'm located in Richmond, Virginia, and I live downtown in Richmond, Virginia. Let's first start with the context of Virginia, which was really ground zero for slavery here in the United States. It is where slaves first arrived to the shores of the United States 401 years ago, to be precise. And Virginia has had a very intentional hand in perpetuating slavery. There were more millionaires per capita here in Virginia than any other part of the country during the height of slavery. There were more Black people enslaved in Virginia than anywhere else in the country at the height of slavery. And then it is also known as the Cradle of the Confederacy. So the capital of the Confederacy, where we understand the history of the Civil War, this was the area that really wanted slavery to keep going. They didn't want to stop it. It had economic implications that would really harm Virginia's economy at that time, and really just make people lose a lot of money. So Virginia has had a very significant footprint in American history, and particularly in perpetuating slavery. And so that weekend was a weekend of a lot of unrest. In Virginia, or Richmond, the city I'm in, is also a Black city. Overwhelmingly, it was historically Black. Gentrification has sort of impacted that some, but I live in Jackson Ward, which is a historic area. It was previously known as the Black Wall Street of the South. So we're hearing more about Juneteenth. And in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was the Black Wall Street. Richmond was known as the Black Wall Street of the South. So there's a lot of pent up emotion and resentment and anger here. And so that definitely came to light the weekend before I was to write this. And I couldn't write. I couldn't get it together. I was emotionally really distraught. I have not watched the full video of Mr. Floyd's murder because it has, it's psychologically traumatizing, quite frankly, for me. And so I know how he died. I have not actually watched him die, and I probably never will. But all of those emotions were happening in real time. And I wanted to write something. I've actually wanted to write something about the impacts of COVID for weeks prior to this, and I just couldn't get my thoughts together. So I literally woke up on Monday morning, and I wrote this in like 3 hours. And I just got my ideas out there. I got my feelings out, and this is what came out. And so the piece is really about a conversation I had in March with a colleague that we talked about kind of worst case scenarios. And I said, he worked in emergency management, and his worst fear was really that a hurricane could hit us at this point, which, global warming, there's so many other arguments there that natural disasters are certainly a threat, right? Especially right now. We just started hurricane season on June 1st. That was his fear. And mine was that we would have another unarmed shooting of an unarmed Black person by police, and people would want to protest. And here we are in, I think, the 24th consecutive day of protests, and nationally and globally. And I wrote about that and the fact that we still have COVID, and that the tie that binds COVID and George Floyd's murders together is racism, and that people are protesting racism. And that racism is just as insidious a disease as COVID, and that there are, ways to draw parallels between the symptoms of COVID and the symptoms of racism.
Which I literally was so drawn to, because sometimes unless you're somebody who's not an empathetic individual, has a lot of difficulty trying to really understand the plight of what's happening to African Americans and people of color in America. But COVID is not one that has been, it has discriminated in many ways, but it also has been indiscriminate in who it's targeted in many ways as well. And I think that people now are much more akin to understand and empathize with those that have COVID because of how much footage, how much material has been circulated, but don't seem to be as empathetic to the plight of African Americans, especially those who are men, especially those who are in the process of being incarcerated, traffic stops and what have you, and then end up escalating where they end up in fatalities. So I thought that you bringing and really kind of highlighting that point to kind of make it something that really everybody should be able to stand up and pay attention to. Some of the symptoms of COVID are temporary loss of sensation, hallucination, and shortness of breath or difficulty breathing. The symptoms of racism are starkly similar. And you go through that talking about different people who have suffered the consequences of each one of these symptoms in their own demise in many ways. And then you go through and analyze where we are and what's going on. And you still kind of ask us towards the end of the article to try to be safe. I know one of our colleagues literally just found out right now, somebody I wanted to actually have on this webinar as well, just got diagnosed with COVID herself, partly because she attended a protest that may have potentially exposed her to the COVID virus. So in that sense, it's very, very close to home. And I'm glad. I applaud you. I can imagine how difficult it's been to articulate in words something that's powerful and is important. as this piece has been. And the good news is it's gotten great traction. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thanks for reading it. Thanks for sharing it, and thanks for the chance to talk about it. It has gotten amazing traction. It's opened up so many media opportunities, and so I've spoken with BBC, with NPR, with The Guardian, Huffington Post. I did a CNBC segment. Was on PBS NewsHour special on Race Matters, and so it's really picked up a lot of traction. And I didn't really realize how profound that portion, the portion that you read, comparing the symptoms of racism to the symptoms of COVID. I didn't really realize how powerful that was until the article started circulating. So I'm just glad I tried to think about ways to explain this to people who may not get it otherwise. And so it sounds like it's really landed, and it's really given some people a lot to think about.
100%. Now, let's shift over, because it kind of falls squarely into kind of my next question, which is COVID in and of itself as a virus has also had, as I said, it's been indiscriminate in that there's people across the world that have died from it or been impacted and infected by it. But we've also seen quite a lot of discussion about how it's disproportionately impacted people of color, especially African-American communities. What do you think about that? And what are you and Time's Up trying to do in that regard as well?
Yeah, COVID has had a very disproportionate impact on African-American and Latinx communities. What we mean by that is that the number of people that have COVID or have unfortunately passed away as a result of COVID is much greater than the proportional percentage of those populations in the larger demographic of the United States. And so there are a couple of reasons for that. Underlying institutional racism, that is the fact that many of the communities of color have underlying chronic conditions. That is diabetes, hypertension, asthma, that make COVID-19 much more complicated and sometimes much more fatal in these populations. Now, let me be explicitly clear, be crystal clear here, that it is not a result of race. It's not as a result of race that COVID is having this disproportionate impact. It is a result of racism. So we live in a society that attributes resources and the allocation of resources by race, quite frankly. And so we can go back to redlining, for example, and the segregation of redlining and the resource allocation as a result of redlining to show us how African-American communities, which, by the way, if we took many of our maps that show us areas that are most at risk for COVID and overlaid them with redlining maps, we would see that they line up perfectly, because this is an example of institutional racism, that it's something that works without you even having to try anymore. So neighborhoods that were redlined and still today are very much segregated tend to not have stable housing, tend to not have fresh fruits and vegetables close by, tend to be in food swamps or food deserts. All of that has an impact on your health and leads to chronic conditions that are very treatable and preventable, but it leads to chronic conditions in these populations. And so add that to the fact that African Americans are overwhelmingly represented in these frontline essential worker positions, cashiers, bus drivers, Uber drivers even, right? That puts you at greater risk of contracting COVID. And so if that puts you at greater risk, and then perhaps you're going back to a neighborhood or a home and you can't really social distancing is a privilege, right? And you have underlying chronic conditions because you have lived and grown up in places that have not afforded you equal opportunities and access to resources. All of these things are stacking up to make COVID so much deadlier for Black and Brown communities. And again, it's not as a result of any genetic deficiency. It's not as a result of any inherent genetic inferiority. It is a result of racism and of the systems that have created the social conditions that have driven disease.
Yeah, and I think that the concept of the privilege that has surfaced due to the COVID crisis is one that is stark and it's scary. And like you said, I think it's very simple to attribute without getting to the source and the root cause of why it is that there's underlying conditions, why it is that people are more exposed, whether it's grouped communities, clustered communities, whether it's the fact that you have to work to put food on the table because your job by necessity is not one where you're furloughed and you're given a salary or unemployment benefits in many ways. So you have to go out there and be on the front line, whether it's at the grocery stores, whether it's in transportation mechanisms. And we've seen it. I mean, we've seen it with even the people who, like you said, who are in Uber, Lyft, Amazon delivery, food delivery, what have you, gig economy related positions. I want to quickly end this part of the conversation with just telling us kind of a quick 1 minute, 1 sentence, if even possible. Why do you think this movement is gaining momentum now? Black Lives Matter has been around for what, maybe 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. And yet what we're seeing is not just protests, but we're seeing changes in sports. We're seeing changes in the commercial sector and what people are doing in the workplace. We're seeing changes in education. We're seeing changes in people's disposition. We're seeing changes where people are calling out people and putting them on the court of the society's court to judge them for their actions and their inactions. So we're seeing a lot more of that, not just in America. Also, it's very, very important to kind of discuss how this is happening in other parts of the world, in Europe, specifically parts of Africa, the Middle East, and so forth. So why is this gaining so much momentum now?
Such a great question. One I've been thinking about myself, one I've pondered with my own friends and in my own social networks and in my own family as well. There's a couple of reasons why I think, and the biggest really, I think, is quite frankly, because of COVID, because we were in this lockdown mode and much of the country is still opening in phases, which means we're really not totally going back, despite kind of what others would want you to think. People are not really back to normal, whatever normal is. There is no normal. So we were in this period of like lockdown. And remember, there's nothing on TV. Like there's nothing on TV but the news. There's no sports events. There's no, new movies and things necessarily coming out. It's a very concentrated moment where, like, for once in American history, you can't ignore what's happening right now because there are no other distractions. Absolutely none. And on top of that, most people are at home. So there's no distractions. Most people are at home. There's no turning away. Everyone has seen this because of this moment that now you can't unsee it. And so I think that the disproportionate impact that COVID is having on the Black community certainly laid a foundation. I think other murders that have led up to this moment, starting all the way back from Emmett Till, we could go back to there, all the way up into the future. But specifically, we had kind of 3 fatalities in a row. Ahmaud Arbery, who was literally run down and shot and killed like livestock. Breonna Taylor, who the police kicked in her door and killed her in her own home. And then, the asphyxiation and the murder of George Floyd. And I think George Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back because we're literally watching the breath and the life leave a human being. And it's very hard to turn away from that, especially in a moment where you cannot turn away because there's nothing else to go look at. So I think that all of these things are layered and are kind of contributing to this moment. And I also think the protests, people are frustrated for a lot of reasons. And also people are missing community, right? Like the opportunity to go to some of these protests, which I have gone to a couple in my own very safe and 6 feet / 500 feet distance away. But to be around this diverse group of people who are protesting on behalf of humanity against racism, it is so heartwarming, and it is so invigorating and like encouraging and uplifting and recharging in a way that so many of us may not have felt over the past several months, because we have been socially distanced, because we have been self-quarantined, because some people have been on lockdown alone and have not seen people in multiple weeks. And so I don't think we should overlook the fact that protests are a demonstration of community as well right now. And that's also something that's driving this moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of looking at it. I remember just even outside my own house in Santa Monica, they were protesting there, and you find yourself just gravitating. It's magnetic. You feel like you want to go out there, not just because of the cause, but the community as well. Knowing you want people to feel a sense of camaraderie towards something that's so noble, which is to go out there and protest. And I think you're exactly right. In many ways, let's be honest, other than the body cams that changed, probably, I couldn't tell you the exact time when body cams came out. Maybe it's 10 years ago, maybe it's less. But the fact that we have reporters, citizen reporting, and journalism holding people accountable, I would say because there was people on the scene for George Floyd, filming him in different angles for the full 46 seconds, that really brought to light how many different opportunities could have happened to mitigate the perfect storm that brought about his demise. Maybe a little bit different with Rashad Taylor, that just happened right now, where it was quick, it was happening very quickly. And then, of course, we were talking about the ex-post when he was shot. There was about a 2-minute, I think 12 seconds, where they didn't even provide him with medical triage, again, showing that systemic racism that comes about. But with George Floyd, there were so many opportunities to stop that. And first responders that were on the scene that said we should stop that. And you heard like testimony transcripts from the dispatcher that was talking about it. So I think it's so nefarious, so insidious, the mechanism of how it happened, that like you said, it broke the straw that broke the camel's back. The same with Aubrey, the same thing happened. But for that film footage from that point that took video of him being shot, like you said, with cattle, we probably wouldn't have come to life. And so I think, and you're seeing this happen over and over, that people are going out there with their cameras and making sure. The bird watcher in Central Park, the situation with the 75-year-old man in Buffalo who got pushed over and again the camera. Constantly, you're finding citizens holding people accountable, holding law accountable. And that's super important. And I'm going to say this because from all my heart, one of the main ways to change it is you've got to sign up for the census, and you've got to vote, because it is on you. It's on citizens. It's no longer just at the highest political level. But if you ignore the highest political level, it could have cataclysmic impact on everything below it. It has to be from the bottom up and the top down. And I know we spoke about that.
Yeah. Well, I think in this moment, more than any other, I can quite frankly think of in modern history, we're seeing the importance of local leadership. From COVID, where there has been very little reliable federal oversight, where your COVID response has literally been determined by really who your governor is, and maybe really who your health commissioner is, and if they believe in science and if they believe in public health, down to moments like this, where you need to know who your police chief is. You need to know who your mayor is and who they would appoint as police chief. Police chiefs usually, not in all places, at the will of the mayor. And how are your police hired? Like, what are the requirements? Do they have a citizen review board or a civilian review board? And so many other local positions are so important. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, if this doesn't speak to the need to be truly active, like civilly active, and to participate in the spectrum of civics here, I don't know what would, because we're seeing not only from a pandemic, from a public health emergency, to ongoing assault of an entire community at the hands of police. and at the hands of truly white supremacy. And so the need for involvement just cannot be overstated enough.
And that really leads us well to the second part of this conversation for our audience specifically, which is diversity in the broadest sense of the term, and then how that kind of plays a role within education and the workforce. Let me read you a little something that I found on the Department of Education. It says here, and this is why diversity is so important. We'll start with education and go into the workplace, and actually it impacts both. A growing body of research shows that diversity in schools and communities can be a powerful lever leading to positive outcomes in school and in life. Racial and socioeconomic diversity benefits communities, schools, and children from all backgrounds. Today's students need to be prepared to succeed with a more diverse and more global workforce than ever before. Research has shown that more diverse organizations make decisions with better results. The effects of socioeconomic diversity can be especially powerful for students from low-income families who historically often have not had equal access to the resources they need to succeed. And I think this is extremely important, just kind of giving you a little bit of a sense. This is just the Department of Education, which has its own issues, to be perfectly frank, as we're seeing right now with the current head of the Department of Education, forgiveness of loans, all kinds of stuff that's happening. And then, of course, obviously, what the COVID crisis has done to magnify whatever outstanding issues that already exist. Let's talk a little bit about, shift over to diversity. What in your opinion is diversity as it pertains to start with education and talk about the workplace, and why do you think it's important?
Well, to me, I think diversity is making sure that everyone in the room isn't the same. Making sure that you're thinking about other people who may not be in the room as well. And ensuring that you're not creating barriers to keep people out of the room. And so diversity is of essential, it is an essential function of any organization. It is essential to any educational experience. It's truly essential to life, quite frankly. And we're seeing right now what happens when you don't have, diversity on your team. What happens when you don't embrace diversity, and the very, negative impacts that can have. And so when you think about the workplace, it's so important, as you just read, that teams have more than just one lens to look through. Because that impacts the way that you do your work. It impacts the product and how you put the product out. It impacts whether the products are even the right one, or whether you're even tackling the right issue. I just can't underscore enough how important that is. And then the next step of that, though, because diversity is kind of, that was kind of the argument. And I think I'm really excited to see that we are evolving into the need for diversity, because we need lots of different people, lots of different perspectives, lots of different life experience represented. We need equity. So those people need to be able to have, enough power to actually shift the conversation and to be able to put input into the conversation. And then we also need inclusion. It can't just be a token, right? You can't just have one person there as the representative for the Black community, as the representative for the Muslim community, as the representative for the Latinx community. We need a sizable number of lots of different types of people to mold and shape our policies, to mold and shape our curriculum, to mold and shape the classroom experience. I think about one time at the Kennedy School, and the Kennedy School was very diverse internationally. I don't think it was very diverse from the domestic standpoint of African Americans, but I think about how rich our experience was because of the sheer number of different types of people we had in one room.
And I think what's important to kind of highlight for our audience is diversity. If we get to the crux of the term, and I'm really glad that you mentioned the word inclusion as well, because you're right. It's not about the token poster child that is, that reminds me, oddly enough, of that picture we were talking about yesterday with Vice President Mike Pence and the campaign committee, and there was one token African American at the front, another token Latinx individual right next to him. Everybody didn't have a mask. I'm sure it was even your worst nightmare times too.
Yes.
But suffice it to say, diversity in and of itself is not just about your race. It's not just about your socioeconomic standing. Mm-hmm. It's about so many things. Mm-hmm. And what I don't want personally is I'm not in the business of vilifying the other who are mm-hmm. not people of color, because then we end up in exactly the same situation. Today it will be our day to scream and voice our opinion. Tomorrow it will be their day and they'll feel it's us against them. And many of the people in these protests are frankly Caucasian. Some of them are quite affluent from what they wear and how they, it doesn't show just, it's not just people of color going out there to fight for what is, injustice and trying to bring together people underneath the banner of equity. And so in that sense, it's important to define diversity as gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity, socioeconomic diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, medical diversity, right? Hardships you face, even things that seem flippant like travel, international experiences in and of itself is diversity, because what it is you're bringing different opinions to the table from a multitude of different perspectives, life perspectives. And so when you're putting together your ideas, and if we get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty, I know the Kennedy School, for example, had application material that really tried to tease out the concept of diversity and how you're helping from a leadership perspective and so forth. And many school applications do the same thing. I think of law school as a classic example where they request a diversity statement. Undergraduate colleges where they bake it into, what are you doing for your community and so forth. I think that's super, super important to have a better sense of what is that diversity. And diversity is not just I'm African American and that's it. Mm-hmm. They end up living in Beverly Hills in a life that may never seem to sense hardship. Mm-hmm. But the reality is everybody does have a sense of diversity, brings that diversity to the table, and they should be able to act on that diversity. And that's the element of the authenticity, right? You're African American, you could have had a job working for a corporation, not being involved in any sense whatsoever. Somebody asks you about your background, you say, I live in Manhattan, New York, I've only lived a good life, but I want all my rights. Well, to me, that's a little bit tough, right? Even though your skin dictates otherwise, your actions are really what counts. To me, to what these schools want to see, it's what is your diversity and how are you acting on it? How authentic is it into your daily life and action? Are you living by what you're saying? I think that's important from that perspective. Let me ask you this. Given what we've just kind of talked about in terms of diversity, how do you stand out as a candidate, academically and in the workplace, to really kind of surface whether it's your diversity or it's your diversity and how you support diversity in other people as well? What are the ways you have to stand out?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to speak to one of your points that you made as well. And, I think you're right that there are several different points that we could look at to look at not only our privilege, but also our diversity. And so I've done a couple of exercises that have really made that so clear and so plain to me. Through a lens of privilege, but also I think that speaks to different lenses of diversity that exist. So, ableism, socioeconomic status, regionality, so like geography even, sexual orientation, religion, age. And so there are lots of different dimensions to diversity. But ultimately, pushes for diversity have always been kind of rooted in the need for there not to just be all white men at the head of anything, or only all white men in a classroom or in a whole medical school class or something like that. So I think we should keep that in perspective as well. But when we think about, how to approach the application process and how to speak to your own kind of dimension of diversity and your own dimension of difference. I think that first and foremost, it has to be authentic. Like, it is not okay to write a story or to make up an experience or lift someone else's experience to sort of make it seem like it's your own. Hamada, I don't know if you watched Little Fires Everywhere, but I just watched that like a few months ago. It's one of my quarantine shows that I watched. And one of the characters of the story is like a white girl, a young white woman who is applying to Yale. And she basically lives the story of this young Black girl who's had like lived with homelessness and had like all of these other challenges. And she kind of lives that experience and writes about it in her Yale essay and gets into Yale. So that is no, shade to any particular institution at all. I want to speak about the situation, which is the fact that it's not okay to create a situation that's not real, right? Talk about your authentic experience. Talk about everyone has had some challenge. So talk about what your challenge is and talk about it authentically. You don't need to elaborate and embellish. You need to talk authentically. And that takes work. Believe me when I say that takes work. I feel like I'm a professional at applying to professional schools. I have written so many personal statements. It's not even funny. But because I have done that, because I have pushed myself to improve upon that and that skill, I understand the formula now for how to write a really moving and real and authentic personal statement, as well as how to explain my truth and talk about myself in a job interview and what my values are and kind of where I see myself in the future. And I just want to underscore that takes work. It also takes time. Like I have evolved into being able to talk, and probably 10 years from now, I'll be like, why did I even describe myself that way? Right? It's an evolution. It takes investment and it takes time. But only you know what your experience has been, and it is up to you to recount your experience in a way that others can understand it as well.
Well, let me. I mean, what you're saying is absolute gold, and I've got to ask you what it is, like your secret sauce of how, like you said, of being able to now feel more comfortable in being able to surface the challenges and talk to them authentically. I've got to ask you that for our audience. But before I even do that, let's use this present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from February to today, everybody in the world has been impacted in one shape or form as it pertains to COVID in a challenging way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, as diminutive as I'm not getting my Amazon packages on time, and I gotta say, to as as fatal as death in people that are very close to our communities, to our families, and so forth. I know I'm petrified. I have an 85-year-old father, a 92-year-old aunt, and we're trying to do it the best we can to minimize any exposure while still giving them a chance to live their life and not feel like they are caged animals, so to speak, in their homes and not being able to go out and do whatever they want to do, but still being very cautious and treading lightly. And then you have all those in between where they don't have choices. We do have a choice. I have a choice. We have support. There's a lot of people that do not have that whatsoever, and that's the privilege factor talking. But using this present example and talking to people who are going to be applying to colleges and universities and graduate programs, quickly kind of tell us maybe what would you do to kind of own that authenticity?
Yeah. First and foremost, think about what everyone else is going to write about, and then cross that off your list to write about, right? So the goal here is to stand out. You want someone to read your personal statement and say, I have to meet this person. Like, I have to meet them. So you're absolutely right. We can all speak to the trauma of COVID. We all can. But maybe you have a different angle to speak to the trauma of COVID about. Maybe you actually had to go to the hospital with a loved one. Maybe you had a fear of, maybe you were actually sick, right? Maybe one of your parents lost their job and you had to step in some way. I would encourage, all of our applicants listening today, think about the story that's not being told. And ultimately, it's your story that's not being told. But think about the ways that you can tell it that will make it stand out. And so to your earlier question, Hamada, the question about kind of the secret sauce for me, it's ultimately that it has to be a story. It has to be a gripping story, both with a gripping opening and with a gripping conclusion. So here's one freebie of advice that I always assume when I'm writing. I always assume that these are extremely busy people. And while I really hope that they would read my whole essay, they may not. So I have to write the most gripping opening I possibly can to try to hook them into reading the whole essay. And I have to write the most gripping conclusion. Now, if they're so busy that they're not able to read the whole thing, I need to have such a gripping opening and such a gripping conclusion that if they only read those 2 paragraphs, they should know everything they need to know about me.
Excellent. And I think that's excellent. And that's what we constantly tell our clients, is that you want to grab their attention, provide context to that gripping moment. I always talk about people, when they write their essays, think about as if you're writing the script for your movie in life. You have the audience is sitting there, they're guzzling down popcorn. I usually eat the popcorn within the first 2 minutes, and then it's a wrap, and it's all over me. But the idea here is that they've got to be able to be drawn in. And what do you typically have in movies? You start off with an action sequence, and then it fades to black, and then it goes back to provide us with context that brings us back to that exact moment. That moment is the pivot moment, and then a decision's made, and it can go one of 2 ways for the course of their life. So I 100% agree with you on that front in terms of that, and the ability to grab them, and the ability to conclude and have a takeaway message. It's almost like a TED Talk, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to walk away from a TED Talk moved only. You need to walk away from a TED Talk with a 1 or 2 sentence takeaway that you'll always remember. Oh yeah, I remember that talk where that gentleman had spoken about creativity and education, and it got 25 million views. Or remember that one talk, and you just remember that concept, that one takeaway, and that's what you want to basically bring. The pitfalls. What about the pitfalls that people fall into constantly? I know you've talked about the authenticity, taking away the story, trying to feed the admissions committee what you think they want to hear versus what is authentically yours, and feeling proud of that story. And if that admission committee doesn't see it for what it's valued, then you don't want to go to that school.
That's right. Yeah. I think pitfalls, a couple of pitfalls are like name dropping. That's not impressive. Like, name dropping does nothing for institutions that want to know about you. I think another pitfall, quite frankly, is writing based on the quote of someone else. Like, how many people are going to quote Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, wonderful people who have made exquisite, contributions to the world. But guess what? The admissions committee wants to hear your voice. They want to be able to find some quotes from you. So I think a really big pitfall that people make is writing a whole essay around the words of someone else. Unless it's maybe some special words of encouragement, or maybe your grandmother's last words or something like that, I would really steer clear of using several of the quotes that are Googleable. Like, anything you can Google, steer clear of it. Steer totally clear of it, because it's not authentic to you. So you really have to sit with this. You have to spend time with this. It's hurtful. You get down to the layers of like, okay, this is really it. I'll just, give you an example of my personal statement for the Kennedy School. Actually, was from a place of real hurt. The fact that I was studying public health, I was studying all about health disparities, health inequities, while at the same time people in my family were dying from the same things I was learning. So this intersection of like, gosh, how do I become? I'm becoming a scholar and an expert in something that I can't even stop from happening in my own family. Right. People dying from chronic diseases, from diabetes, from hypertension, from stroke, things that are preventable. And literally the first statement of my personal statement was, my family is dying. And that, it's hard for me to even go back and read it because that's how deep I got. And so I want to tell you that it takes some work to get there, but it is worth it once you do.
And that obviously throughout that whole process, I mean, by very nature, it had the elements of diversity within it because you're talking about its impact on groups and moves it from a micro, your experience, to the macro, and bigger experience, which is what you want people to feel that have a vested interest in your story. And I always use the concept of like the aha test. If you're not moved, if you're not jarred, if you're not brought to tears, if you're not feeling a sense of catharsis by going through your story, then you can bet the admissions committee is not gonna either. And the same with an employer in terms of your workplace, to be true and authentic to yourself. If they can't be moved by you and want you to be part of their workforce, part of their team, because you're not moved by it in your story and what you're trying to say, then it most likely they're not going to be moved by that. I think we've talked about some really, really critical points here. I want to quickly just kind of close it out by just talking about one last question so that we can kind of end on the hour mark. Where do you see the future of diversity? Where do you see the future of all of this? I say this with this backdrop here. Right now, just announced in the UC system, they've repealed Prop 209, which was which had closed out affirmative action for the last 24 years, and they've just recently repealed it, or they're going through the repealing process of it. That's from the education tip. From the workforce tip, a lot of organizations are coming out. Recently, Bank of America gave $1 billion for equity. PayPal just pledged $500 million, creating what they're saying an economic opportunity fund to support Black and underrepresented minority businesses and communities. Same with Google, same with Facebook, same with other organizations out there. We're seeing this. We're seeing it amplified. We're putting people are being put on blast. There's a lot of movement. Where do you see the future of this going?
You know, I think there's a lot of promising momentum right now that's really encouraging to me. I think that equity, diversity, and inclusion will be front and center for the next, at least 5 years, hopefully. I'm encouraged by the amount of resource, the amount of financial resource I see being put towards uplifting the Black community in particular. It's a start. I hope that there's more to come. Quite frankly, it's a start, but it's not enough when we're up against 401 years of oppression and 401 years of systemic and institutional racism. So I'm encouraged by it, but I hope it continues. And let me also say in this moment, I have also had to have these conversations with others in my network. This is a very Black Lives Matter centric moment for a lot of reasons, mostly because the people who are dying at the hands of police brutality are Black men and women, Black men and women. And so this is undeniably a Black Lives Matter moment, but that does not mean that the lives of other minorities, that does not mean that the lives, in fact, of white people don't matter, right? My truth, which is that Black Lives Matter, does not negate your truth, which is that your life matters as well. It's just that we are in a system, we are in a country that requires us to make it clear that our lives matter, because for 401 plus years, they have not. And so I just want to center my remarks on the fact that while this is a Black Lives Matter moment, if we eradicate anti-Black racism, it helps everybody. It helps everybody. And so I'm encouraged, I'm hopeful, but this should only be the beginning. We cannot rest on our laurels and say, look at how far we've come. This is great. It's done. We're up against generations of oppression, generations of economic disenfranchisement, and it will take more than action just in this moment, even though I'm really proud of the action that's already taken place.
Well, that's an amazing way to end it. And I want to end it on a call to action. As I said from the beginning of this whole conversation, this is an election year. If COVID hadn't happened, if George Floyd and others had not been killed, we probably would be completely inundated with mudraking and politicking and all kinds of stuff in the lead up to the election. The reality is, it is an election year. Do not forget that. And I say that because Loren and I also went to Florida. We knocked on doors together in 2016 to get out the vote. As a lawyer, I monitored the polls. Loren was out there with me, as well as a friend of ours, Teresa, who now is hopefully getting better from suffering from COVID, as we mentioned earlier. I was out there in 2012, 2008, 2004. Civic engagement is incredibly important. Go register. The majority of people who are registering now are not people of color, are not minorities, are not the underserved communities. They've probably given up on the idea. In the end of the day, this is a twofold process. It starts in the streets, but it also is in Capitol Hill, and you've got to play your role and you've got to vote. So register to vote and vote in November. It's an election year. Let's not let this get robbed from everybody who doesn't have a chance to vote and get out there. And like you said, Loren, this is not something that's going to be solved today. Let's maintain the momentum on every front, legally, societally, healthcare. Your work is incredibly important. I'm glad you shared the article with us. I'm glad you talked to us today about it. And I look forward to collaborating with you and others out there to do whatever we can to get rid of injustices, as we said, the Black lives. And you've explained it very well as to why it's front and center now. But communities that are underserved, whether they're, you know, I work with veterans constantly. A lot of the veterans are Black, Latinx, Caucasian, women, men, and what have you. It's a classic group that's completely underserved and make up a huge part of the homeless community. We got to go out there. It's about injustices and it's about inequities, and we have to play our role. So thank you so much for being with us today, Loren, on a very, very important time in our history. I'm glad we're standing together to get through this, and we will continue working on it. So thank you for having us and for and being part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. And with that, without further ado, I will sign off on this conversation. We probably will have some more discussions, more again on the education and the workplace front, as it pertains to issues that are really going to be are mattering to us, whether it's we talked about the affirmative action situation that's happening in the University of California. It's exciting new developments, what's happening in terms of schools taking time out, whether what we're seeing in the workplace and so forth. But all of this really matters for those who are signed and subscribed to Right Track. So keep working with us. Keep asking us questions. We're available at info@righttrackadmissions.com. Obviously, email us if you have questions for Dr. Loren Powell. We'll definitely direct it to her. And thank you for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected. And we'll touch base soon.